for 7 years as a graduate student from 1989 until 1996. I've been part of the Harriman as a faculty member since 2006. And I can't remember an event that I wanted to do less than this one, to be honest with you. So this is a difficult topic to explore the impact and legacy of Alexey Navalny. I say that not because we don't have a great panel. We do have a great panel. Ben Noble from Oxford University, who's written clearly one of the most well-respected and balanced biographies of Navalny, along with his co-authors. Ian Cooper, professor emeritus from the journalism school, longtime NPR correspondent, and Mikhail Zygar, founder of Dozhd, frequent contributor to many outlets, including the New York Times, and most recently the author of War and Punishment. So we have a really terrific panel. I'll make a very brief opening remark, and then we'll turn to Ben. And then Anne, and then Mikhail. And we're also very fortunate to have Matthew Murray here, who is taught at Harriman for several years now, and is a longtime expert on anti-corruption efforts in Russia, worked with Alexey Navalny about 10, 15 years ago, and he's recently done lots of work in Ukraine, and will have a very unique perspective as well. So I just want to make 3 brief points about Alexey Navalny. One is that he was very much a unique political talent. Many people opposed Putin. Many people tried to engage in various kinds of movements and campaigns against him, and no one was able to do what Navalny did. No one was able to build a nationwide regional network. No one was able to crowdfund resources in order to take on the Kremlin. No one was able to run the kind of campaign that Navalny ran in 2013 as the mayor of Moscow. And in the end, he came up short of his ultimate goal. But at the same time, according to our research, his approval ratings were around 30%. Using some very sneaky social science techniques to try to detect whether or not respondents are answering questions truthfully. We think that the numbers are significantly higher than reported, because many respondents are simply afraid to express their level of support. I'm sure the question of Navalny's nationalism will come up, and it's a very complicated picture. He took part in the Russian marches, which are a gathering of Russian nationalists, many of whom express white power sentiments. He's made grotesque comments about Central Asians. At the same time, he had a number of Jews in his inner circle and interacted very easily with them. And he never really made exclusionary nationalism as really central to his appeal. On Ukraine as well, he declared the annexation of Crimea illegal in 2014, but also said that he wouldn't do anything about it if he was elected president. And this was a different stance than Nemtsov took, who was critical of the annexation of Crimea at the time. At the same time, he unequivocally condemned the invasion of Russia and called for the return to the 1991 borders. And our research also finds that Navalny's supporters are keenly opposed to Russia's war on Ukraine. That is one of the best predictors of opposition to the wars, knowing whether or not somebody supported Navalny. So it's a very complicated legacy that I'm sure we'll get into. The last thing I want to say is Alexey Navalny was an evolving figure. Navalny of 2006 was not the Navalny of 2011, not the Navalny of 2016, and not the Navalny of 2024. And one of the great tragedies is that we won't get to see what Navalny would have become and what would have been the next phase of Alexey Navalny. So with that, let's turn now to Ben Noble, and I can't recommend highly enough his biography, along with Jan Mati Dolbaum, Morvan Lalouette, and Ben. So Ben, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tim, for the invitation to take part in this panel. It's an honor to take part in this event. So I'm going to be very much building on some of the points that you've just made and maybe adding a bit more detail, but I'm sure we'll get into lots of it in the Q&A as well. So at the risk of stating the obvious, Alexei Navalny died as the leading figure of the Russian political opposition, even from behind bars. But I think we need to make an important semantic point, and that is that it would be wrong to call him the leader of the opposition as opposed to the leading figure within the Russian political opposition. And the reason why that semantic difference is important is because of the conflicting groups and personalities that make up the Russian political opposition. And given the fact that these groups and individuals didn't all look to Navalny for leadership, in fact, lots of them had quite conflictual relationships with Navalny personally and with his team. Navalny's profile, as we got to know it, was the result, I think, and as I explore with Yamati Dolban and Morgan Lalouette in our book, it was a result of three interconnected activities. The first was his anti-corruption investigations, and he originally emerged as a popular blogger on this topic towards the end of Vladimir Putin's second presidential term, and I'm looking forward to hearing comments from Matthew about that, given the fact that they worked together at that time. Second, Navalny's profile grew on the back of organizing and leading protests, often with chants of Russia without Putin. And the third core dimension involved Navalny's political activities, as already mentioned by Tim, including originally as a member of the Liberal Party Yabloko, as the runner-up in the 2013 Moscow mayoral election, and in Navalny's attempted run in the 2018 presidential election. Of course, he was blocked. He wasn't allowed on the ballot in the end by the authorities. And these three strands complemented each other, allowing him over time to put together a team and to build an incredibly broad movement that ended up, I think, forming the most significant autonomous opposition political force in Russia. The infrastructure that he created with his team, including the network of regional offices in the run-up to the 2018 election, functioned in effect, if not in law, as a political party, and the authorities denied Navalny's attempts at every turn to register a political party, I think because of the fear that he could use that as an even more effective platform and a legal platform if that party was registered. Stepping back and thinking more broadly, Navalny wanted to be a quote normal politician in a normal country. He wanted Russia to be a rule of law, democratic state with free markets, sensible social policies, and of course, markedly less elite level corruption. And he saw that as making Russia, if it were to go down that path, it would be a European path of development, and Russia would become a normal European state, again, in his language. He also tried to inspire Russians to think about what he called the beautiful Russia of the future, which is one example of the very different rhetoric that he would use and the different imagery that he would use in contrast to a regime increasingly fixated on past glories and history. It's also important to remember, and this is a point that Tim made in his opening remarks, that Navalny's positions evolved over time. He was an incredibly ambitious politician who, from some core principles, explored ways to build broader coalitions, including trying to bridge what might seem a very difficult gap and prove to be a very difficult gap, if not impossible gap, between liberal forces and nationalist forces. And because of his desire to build those broader coalitions, he ended up saying things that alienated certain groups. And he said things that were racist, xenophobic, or nationalist. He apologized for some of them. For example, he referred to Georgians as being rodents around the time of the Russia-Georgia war. He apologized for that, but he didn't apologize for everything. I would say more often than not, he simply moved on to different talking points. So nationalism as a talking point very much fell away as time progressed. And I think it's important in this context to look at those who supported Navalny, those activists who would end up volunteering in the regional networks, as well as those who would end up going to the mass street protests. Even many of those who disagreed with some of these past statements that Navalny made that have been condemned by many within Russia and outside of Russia, they still recognized that he was the best placed figure to take on the authorities. And so these detailed debates that they might want to have with Navalny about important topics, including, for example, ethnic minorities, including his views on people from Central Asia, economic migrants, they're important topics, but maybe they had to wait until, quote unquote, normal politics was possible after Navalny, his team and the movement had in fact achieved a Russia without Putin. Stepping back even further, the question of how significant Navalny was is, of course, being hotly debated now, but it was also hotly debated when Navalny was alive. And I think it's important to underscore the fact that his significance was never simply a question of the level of his support in Russian society. So Tim's already mentioned polling. He's already mentioned the research that he and his colleagues have done that show that Navalny's popularity was around 30%. If we look at the Independent Levada Center, their polling from September 2020 suggested that 20% of Russians approved of his activities. And that's really quite extraordinary, given that the official state narrative regarding Navalny villainized him and portrayed him as a paid agent of the West and definitely not a patriot. If we look at Levada Center polling from January 2023, by contrast, the level of support reported was 9%. But as Tim has mentioned, we have to be incredibly cautious of interpreting these polling figures. It could be that Russians who were polled had lost hope in the message that Navalny had, because by then he was behind bars, or they were afraid to say that they supported somebody who was labeled as an extremist and terrorist by the state. But I think the broader point is that given the way that Navalny was maligned by state media and blocked in so many ways by the authorities, we'll never truly know how popular he was when he was alive, but also how popular he might have been in a free Russia. And I think another way of thinking about this is that because the Kremlin has scorched the political landscape of any meaningful autonomous opposition forces, it meant that even a figure with minority support in society was seen as an existential threat. In other words, Navalny presented this charismatic alternative in a system that was dominated and remains to be dominated by one dull, albeit exceedingly dangerous man, that is Vladimir Putin, who the authorities want, including in the run-up to the presidential election, if we in fact want to use that term, that will take place, the main voting will take place between the 15th and the 17th of this month. The authorities want to present Putin as the leader without alternatives. So Navalny presented an alternative and in that way was a thorn in the Kremlin's side. And so much like his life's work, Navalny's death unmasked even further the true nature of Russia's political regime, that is, a murderous personalist autocracy. And the nature of the regime is, of course, on wider display with devastating death and destruction in Russia's war on Ukraine. I imagine we're going to turn to the question of Navalny's legacy in other remarks and in the Q&A, but a few thoughts when we're thinking about his legacy. There isn't one legacy. We can think about how he will serve, possibly as a martyr figure, as a symbol of opposition to Putin, as a profound demonstration of quite what it takes to try and take on the current political leadership. Navalny, as I've mentioned, called for Russia without Putin, but with his death, Putin has created a Russia without Navalny after an extraordinary struggle, not only by Navalny the man, but by his team and by the broader movement. But Navalny also changed what it meant to be an activist and a politician in Russia. The team that he built, of course, continues its work. And now Yulia Navalnaya has said that she will carry on her husband's legacy and she will continue to fight for the future that Navalny wanted. But also on a more fundamental level, when we look at how Navalny was able to change people's attitudes, their minds, their values, their conception of what was possible in politics, that might be something that is largely hidden at the moment, given the extraordinary repression within the country, but it could be something that is a much longer lasting legacy. So that brings me to the end of my comments, and I look forward to hearing the comments from the other panelists. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ben. That was terrific. Now we'll hear from Ann Cooper, who will give some thoughts on Navalny as a journalist, her innovative and creative one at that.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So we've already heard a bunch of labels applied to Alexey Navalny: activist, anti-corruption crusader, politician, Russia's leading opposition figure, martyr figure, as Ben just said. So what about Navalny as journalist? Well, Ilya Lazowski, an editor with the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, seemed to give him that title in something he wrote a few years ago. He said that although Navalny was best known outside of Russia as an opposition politician, his most enduring legacy may be as the producer of an unorthodox but highly effective brand of investigative journalism. Lazowski went on, "It is this exposure of modern Russia's rotten underpinnings that may end up being his most enduring contribution to the country." Now, the investigations of Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation are indeed an enduring legacy, and one with a huge audience. The early investigation exposing the riches of Dmitry Medvedev now has been seen 47 million times, and of course, Putin's palace. That was the video that was released after Navalny returned to Russia from his treatment for poisoning. Putin's palace has been viewed 131 million times on YouTube. So does that popularity of the work that he did make him a journalist? And did Navalny himself think that he was a journalist? I think the answer to both of those questions is no. Navalny's anti-corruption videos were always integral to his political activism. They were designed to galvanize support for political change, for clean government, for rejection of the ever-increasing repression in Russia. So you're not going to find ambiguity in an anti-corruption foundation investigation. There's no effort to get the other side's point of view, no scruples about, let's say, using a fake identity to get information. I'm sure most of you have seen the Navalny documentary, and there's that incredible moment when he gets a telephone confession from one of the men responsible for his poisoning. Now, to do that, he dials a number and then he lies by telling the man he's calling from the Russian Security Council and urgently needs information on why the poisoning did not kill its target. It's absolutely riveting to watch. It elicits information that Navalny was never going to get without the deception. When he called some others before that and said, "This is Alexey Navalny," click, they all hung up on him, of course. But at Columbia Journalism School, where I have taught, we would call that an ethics violation. Journalists need to be truthful and transparent about who they are. But then Navalny's press secretary, Kira Yarmysh, in 2020 said quite emphatically, "We are not journalists. We don't need to present the point of view of the different sides," she said. "If we don't like something and we consider such and such a person a crook, then we can call him a crook directly." Crook is not a word that I would advise my students to use in their stories. "It seems to me," she said, "that this is the secret to the success of our investigations. They call things by their proper names." True, but that's not the only reason that Navalny's investigations were so successful. His reports are all packaged in videos full of easily understood graphics with fast-paced narratives and frequent touches of Navalny's rather puckish sense of humor. And all of that helps draw in an audience and then keep them there to hear the clear storytelling, often on very complicated issues. And explaining how we got this information is often a key element in the videos. But in the end, you know, graphics and humor are not what matter. What makes people watch is what's at the heart of each of the anti-corruption exposés. And in many of the Navalny videos, the heart of the story is based on journalism, on terrific investigative reporting. So I want to show a couple of short clips from a video released 4 years ago. It's called A Yacht, an airplane, a girl, forbidden love at your expense. So first, we're just going to see like a minute of how it begins as Navalny introduces what he calls a love story.
Не так много мест на планете Земля подходит больше для того, чтобы начать вам рассказывать любовную историю. Это Центральный парк города Нью-Йорка, возможно, самое романтическое место на Земле. Даже если вы здесь сами не были, вы, конечно, много раз видели эти классические картинки в кино и по телевизору. Идеальное место для начала нашего рассказа. Нам Центральный парк еще очень подходит, потому что у нас не просто история о любви мужчины и женщины. У нас, конечно, еще и история о любви к очень большим деньгам. И мы здесь не просто гуляем. Мы на самом деле здесь, в Центральном парке, занимаемся тем, что ищем важнейшие улики, потому что история наша в России, на самом деле, она запретная, но наши влюбленные решили открыть свои души и свои сердца почему-то не жителям Москвы и не в парке Горького, а вот здесь, в Центральном парке Нью-Йорка. Это и будут наши важнейшие доказательства, которые мы найдем прямо сейчас.
So the man and the woman in love in this story are Andrei Kostin, head of the Russian state bank VTB, and his girlfriend, Nailya Askarzad. She is the very pretty anchor of a not very popular show on state TV. So why is this in Central Park? Well, right after this, Navalny starts telling this tale, sits down on a bench in Central Park, and you know those little plaques on the back that are dedicated to people. So he shows us this one that is dedicated to Andrei Kostin and signed Nailya. Then he walks us through how he confirmed it's really her, because there's no last name there, and that she paid at least $10,000 for the plaque. And he does this by going to, I guess I can't remember if it's a city office or the Central Park Conservancy, but the records are all there. And this is one of those examples of how he shows you, this is how we got this information and confirmed it. Sweet love story. Then he moves on to some other signs of their love, including a pile of lavish riches that the banker has bestowed on his girlfriend. There's real estate, of course, a private jet that she can use to jet around Europe to go to interviews that she's doing, and a super yacht, all bought by the banker, Navalny says, with dirty money. So now we're going to look at a somewhat longer clip about how Navalny connects Nailya to one of these gifts.
Пока мы составляли дневник передвижений Наиля Аскерзаде по миру, мы не могли кое-чего не заметить. Наиля очень часто отдыхает на море. Очень. Фотографии скудные, в основном на них ничего не видно, кроме воды и модных нарядов. Фотографии она тоже, не будь дурой, выкладывает не сразу с места, а через несколько дней или недель спустя. Но сразу видно, ей невозможно хочется похвастаться тем, что отдыхает она на яхте. Но нужно же, чтобы подруги увидели и умирали от зависти.
Алло, Галочка, ты сейчас умрешь. Потрясающая новость.
И каждый раз в разные даты, в разных точках планеты микроскопические детали яхты, попадающие в кадр, одинаковые. То есть яхта, собственная личная яхта. Но наша героиня специально фотографируется так, чтобы идентифицировать яхту по ее снимкам визуально было бы невозможно. Но мы придумали другой способ. Каждый самолет, частный или нет, отправляет радиосигнал о своем положении. То же самое делают и суда в их числе и яхты. Их координаты в любой момент времени можно найти и достаточно просто. Кроме того, у нас есть Инстаграм нашей мадам с сотнями фотографий и рассказами об отпусках. Итого, у нас есть 3 массива абсолютно публичной информации из открытых источников. Инстаграм, перемещение ее самолета по миру, ну и данные с радаров всех существующих в мире яхт. То есть теоретически мы можем просто наложить это все друг на друга и понять, какие яхты выходили в море в тех городах, куда прилетал самолет на Иле. Звучит просто, но на практике, например, в окрестностях Ниццы, где была и она, и ее самолет с 30 июля по 4 августа, в море выходило 5234 лодки. Среди них точно была яхта на Иле, но 5000 многовато. Среди 5000 мы нужную яхту не найдем. Но почему бы не посмотреть тогда в других городах, там, где был наш самолет? Мы нашли, какие из этих 5000 яхт выходили в море в итальянской Ольбии с 14 по 17 августа, и наша выборка сократилась до 256. Потом добавляем Генуя с 30 по 31 августа, и яхт становится всего лишь 34. Ну а дальше уже мы смотрим Кипр, где самолет был с 30 июня по 5 июля. И яхт, которые были в этих 4 местах в нужные даты, у нас остается ровно одна. Встречайте Sea&Us, 62-метровая суперяхта, ведущий телеканала «Россия-1» Наиле Аскерзаде.
Thanks. You seem to have a lot of vacation time, I thought. By the way, the yacht Sea&Us was just named in an indictment of Kostin issued last month by the U.S. Justice Department, which says he violated sanctions against him by using U.S. dollars to main this and another super yacht. So, you know, these documentaries are filled with great graphics, funny graphics, sarcastic humor, and devoid of any pretense of objectivity. So does that make Navalny a journalist? Not by the standards of Columbia Journalism School. But we're talking about Putin's Russia, and it's impossible to play by normal rules and produce truthful, independent journalism there. In fact, it's pretty much impossible to produce independent journalism at all inside Russia, which is why hundreds of journalists have fled, though many of them continue to report from exile, like Roman Anin. He's the founder of the independent Russian investigative site iStories. And like so many others, Anin has stopped short of embracing the filmmakers at the Anti-Corruption Foundation as journalists. Here's one thing he said a few years ago: they don't follow journalistic standards and never try to listen to the other side, which saves them time and makes their stories simpler to understand. At the same time, Anin said, Navalny's investigations were more effective than those of independent Russian journalists. Indeed, Navalny, he said, has created probably the most effective investigative media outlet in the country. So one final thought about Navalny and journalism. Just after he died, John Alsop of Columbia Journalism Review said that in Russia, where truth is under constant assault, getting the truth out matters more than categorizing the truth tellers. Navalny's political career and his journalism complemented each other, Alsop wrote. And in the end, if Navalny was never primarily a journalist, he undoubtedly committed important acts of journalism.
Great, thank you. Great, thank you very much. Now we'll hear from Mikhail Zygar, who can comment on any of a variety of different aspects of his personal relationships with Alexey Navalny, his take on Navalny's legacy and impact as an opposition figure, as a politician. I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And yes, actually, I would love to start with Navalny's legacy, because I think that's when the person is dead, we know everything about him, and we can judge his character by his influence and by his legacy. And I think it's really important that he is the example of the Russian political figure who strongly believed in democratic values. And that's probably one of the most important parts of his legacy, because in the cynical country that is 100% cynical, that is offering cynicism as its national idea, where propaganda spreads the idea that democracy does not exist and there is no such thing as free and fair elections, and free press is something invented by the Americans, and in reality it does not exist at all. But Navalny was the person, probably the only politician, the only popular politician in Russia, the only politician in Russia, and the only person who really courageously and ardently was promoting the democratic values. And he was repeatedly saying that he did not believe in the idea of Russia's unique path. He did not believe in all those old fairy tales that Russia needs dictatorship, Russia needs strong hand, Russia is doomed to be an empire. He was trying to prove that it's a lie. Russia can be the normal country. Russia can be proper democracy. And I think that's once he's dead, that rhetoric is going to be remembered by millions and millions of people. And that's why I think that when we start, when I hear people discussing his controversial rhetorics, it's hard not to call all those all that analysis a bit misleading, because he doesn't have a legacy of a nationalistic politician. He did not teach anyone to be nationalist. He did not, like, his influence to Russian nationalism is zero. We don't see that. We don't see that kind of conversation among Russians inside Russia or outside of Russia. He did nothing to support Russian nationalists. 100% of his supporters are strongly believing in liberal democracy, and all of Russian nationalists hate Navalny. And I think that proves it, that actually, like, he was not a nationalist, and he did nothing to promote Russian nationalism. And in a way, I find it misleading, because a lot of great politicians of the past, or great politicians who live right now, did have controversial facts in their biographies. But we would never dare to judge Vladimir Zelensky by the jokes he used to pronounce as a comedian working for a Russian state television. Yeah, as you fairly said, people change. People, their political positions can develop, and we know that the most important part of Navalny's life was exceptionally about democratic and liberal values. At the same time, just to make my my contribution a bit more controversial and or deep, he is a very complicated figure, and yes, he was a very complicated personality. And before going to prison, before his poisoning, he had a very complicated reputation of the person who always argues with everyone. We had very complicated relationships, because I was for several years I was running Russia's only independent news TV channel, TV Rain, or Dozhd, and we started working together because once I recently wrote about that story for the Time magazine. On January 1st, 2015, he called me And that was a very bad period for him, for us, for everyone. His brother was imprisoned, and he was still free in his Moscow apartment. And he asked me and TV Rain to help them to start producing videos. He thought that his long reads, his long investigations published in Life Journal do not work anymore, and so he wanted. So actually, we made their first investigation about Prosecutor General Chaika together. We worked as two producers of that story, and now famous Maria Pevchik was our correspondent. But from the beginning, I know and I remember that we had very different approaches to the way how we should work. And from the beginning, we probably all of us know that phrase he used to use, good propaganda machine. That was something he was trying to build. And in the beginning, he called his media campaign good propaganda machine. He then decided that the word propaganda is not appropriate, but actually that was his intention from the beginning, to make an alternative to the state propaganda. I think it's important that he has managed to create a cult. So he was much more than just a political figure. He was the leader of the cult. We can call it, some people call it totalitarian sect. That's a bit too much, but obviously that was a cult. And obviously everyone who worked for Navalny did that not because they were paid money, but they strongly believed in him, in him as a spiritual leader. That's the model. That's probably one of the best models that would work in Russia. I know that because for several years I remember myself building a cult at our TV channel, and it was the only, when you don't have money, when you confront the state that is obviously hostile, the only possibility to inspire people and to make them fight for your righteous cause is to create some kind of that secret order. But it was not about it was not a bad cult in a way, but still, and we still see that's some part of his legacy, and that would influence what was going to happen with FBK, with Anti-Corruption Foundation, and we still don't know if Yulia Navalny looks like a queen. She's loved by everyone. She's the unique personality who can become the unifying figure for the Russian opposition. Because I think that Alexey Navalny was more than a popular opposition leader. He was the Russian opposition. There was no other oppositional figures, even though Mikhail Khodorkovsky or Maxim Katz or whoever, they can call themselves politicians, but only Navalny had any degree of popularity in Russia. He had very high approval rating, unlike all the rest. And it's very important to watch what's going to happen to his legacy, and because that's the very strong force behind his team, behind Yulia and Maria Pevchik and Anti-Corruption Foundation. And they are obviously the most important Russian media and the most important, even though unregistered, political party, but still some kind of a cult. And with Alexey Navalny turning into some kind of Russian Jesus Christ, that's even more of a cult. And it's really strong. The last thing I want to conclude with, it's very hard for a lot of people because a lot of Russians had had strong belief that he was a magician, that he was Russian Harry Potter, who can somehow mysteriously destroy Putin, and we just have to wait for it. A lot of people who left Russia after the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, even though they understood that it was terrible and everyone was suffering and war is a terrible war crime, but still a lot of people, millions of people, believe that somehow one day he will go out of prison and somehow he will win Putin and all of us will go back to Russia. And that magic somehow is not there anymore, because now a lot of people are so depressed, not because they feel sorry for Navalny, but because they feel sorry for their dreams, for their beliefs, for their knowledge that was going to be the happy ending of that story. And now, and it's like Harry Potter ending with Dark Lord Voldemort killing Harry Potter, and that's what we have just seen. So it's that's why it's such a tragedy for a lot of Russians. At the same time, I think it must be used in a good way, because from now on, a lot of people should realize that it depends on them. No one would magically destroy the regime. No one would magically turn Russia into the democratic country overnight. It's the job for everyone. Thank you.
It does feel like the end of an era in some sense, and the rules of the political game have continued to change, and we're in a very different place now. Now I'd like to turn to Matt Murray, who, as I mentioned before, is an anti-corruption expert, has taught at Harriman for a long time, and in some sense knew Navalny before he was Navalny. With the capital N. So, Matt, you want to?
Thank you, Tim. I'm not sure. There I am. Okay, so thank you very much, Tim, and thank you to my fellow panelists and for this opportunity. For some context here, I founded and directed an NGO in Russia devoted to business ethics and corporate governance, starting in the year 2000, and did that from 2000 to 2012. And along that path, I met Alexey Navalny in 2007, and we joined forces to work on the question of how optimally to fight corruption in Russia at that time, because at that time there was still some tension between a Russia that could emerge as a rules-based free market and a Russia that was headed in the direction of systemic corruption. And so part of Alexei's legacy certainly is that he understood corruption as a systems problem. He was an analyst in my experience, and he did groundbreaking work to uncover the systemic nature of corruption in the country. In other words, it wasn't just a deviation from a norm, it was becoming normative, and therefore presented challenges that were deeply rooted, and this also helps explain why he evolved from being an anti-corruption activist, a lawyer, and a social media groundbreaking activist, to a politician, because he was actually fighting the system. And so when he used to say that I was the good cop to his bad cop, because he would expose these highly systemic cases of corruption, for example, with Transneft, with Russian rail, in the health industry, and he would produce the findings. And then in my NGO space, the work was about how to prescribe solutions for the country. So as we turn to the subject of this panel, I would emphasize that as part of his legacy, he was also a man of some faith. This is my other experience of him. People are asking me regularly now, why did he go back in January 2021? And, you know, I share an anecdote where he was at dinner in my home and when he was a Yale World Fellow, and he'd been here for a couple months in the States. And over dinner, he said, I want to go back to Russia. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're doing this great fellowship. And he's like, I miss Russia. And he was fundamentally impatient, and he was fundamentally of the belief that if Russians exercised free will, that they could be a democracy tomorrow, a modern, stable, and peaceful democracy. So my question for the panel then is to look a little bit at the pulling back the camera a bit on the day that Putin expanded the military invasion into Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Alexey happened to be on trial on another set of fabricated charges. And even though he faced another 15 years in prison, he raised his hand and expressed opposition to the war. But he also, as a systems analyst, gave his theory as to the cause of the war. And the theory he gave was that it was fundamentally a diversion for Putin from the theft and impunity of the leadership of the country. And so I think it would be interesting to talk a little bit about whether, again, I was struck during the funeral procession and event in Moscow last week, how one of the slogans being chanted was peace for Ukraine, freedom for Russia. So is there a moment here when the community that supports him can take a look at the systemic corruption in Russia as a cause of war, and what can be done with the Alexey Navalny legacy to continue to shine a spotlight on systemic corruption as a cause of war, and anti-corruption as part of this solution to a sustainable peace?
Great, thanks, Matthew. Ben, do you want to, do you have any thoughts on that? And I'll open it up to the panel. I want to be sure we don't forget Ben, because he's with us virtually.
I'll hover above you on the screen with some initial thoughts. I think it's interesting to look back at the early days after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the conversation about the broader activities of the Anti-Corruption Foundation and the broader ecosystem of Navalny's organizations. And there was a really important conversation, and that conversation appeared to me to boil down to a question, or in fact an accusation, that Navalny and his team had been focusing on the wrong thing. They had been focusing on corruption when really they should have been focusing on Russian aggressive imperialism. And that, I think, was a really important moment. I'm going to warn you, Matthew, that I don't have an answer whether I think that or depending on how you construct the causality, in order to stop the war, you stop corruption. Because, I mean, even if that is the causal path you want to draw it, that's not a very easy task to have. But I think it's not an either or. I don't think anybody should be pushing Navalny's team now into a choice between, do you focus on rooting out corruption or do you call for an end to Russia's war on Ukraine? They can do both, and there are things that can be done to tackle both at the same time. So avoiding binary choices is really important, and whatever steps can be taken to avoid that binary thinking is really important. And I suppose it goes back, I realize I'm shoehorning now a bit and moving away from your question, Matthew, but to pick up on some of the points that Mikhail made about looking at some of the more controversial parts of Navalny's history and that being misleading. I'd push back on that and say that so much of it boils down to how those more complicated pages are treated. Are they being raised in order to discredit Navalny? I certainly hope that my comments weren't taken in that spirit. I raised them as a way to talk about how his views evolved over time and how it points to him being an ambitious politician. That's the first point that I make. But the second one, it's interesting that you use the language of Navalny being a cult leader, because that, to me, inevitably raises the question, if you have the leader of a cult who is advocating for proselytizing the importance of liberal democratic values, what would the future have looked like of a cult leader transitioning to somebody acting as one among many different politicians in a competitive liberal democratic landscape? It certainly is one of the questions, one of the critiques that people had of Navalny, of his team, of the organization when they were operating. They recognized that they were using the language of the importance of liberal democracy, but maybe the way that they ran their organizations could be dictatorial, which is why some of the research that's reported within the book that I co-authored points to people saying a nervousness that the team were dictatorial, and that Navalny, this is something isn't something that I believe, but some people regarded him as being just another dictator in waiting who used the language of liberal democracy, but they were a cult leader in your language who would just become a dictator if they were able to engineer a Russia without Putin. So I hope that's a quick answer to your question, Matthew, and Mikhail, I hope you don't mind me picking up on some of those points. Thanks.
Mikhail, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. That's a very interesting question, but actually now we know the answer. We've been warned of dangers of the terrible dictator in waiting, Alexey Navalny, for so many years. I remember just 6 months ago, I read about a lecture by a very famous independent scholar from Glasgow, Scotland, whose name is Anatoly Chubais, and he was saying that Navalny is much more dangerous than Putin, and that kind of rhetorics. It was 6 months ago. It was not before the war. It was during the war. Chubais, who left Russia and was sharing his political analysis. We have heard a lot of that, yeah, and probably. So that's really complicated question. There was a possibility. We had dozens or thousands of different scenarios how potential political future of Alexey Navalny could evolve into. Yeah, we have seen a lot of truly democratic leaders in former Soviet Union who became can we call Boris Yeltsin a dictator? Not him, but actually what happened to him and his inner circle in the late 90s was a shame. We saw democratic president of Kyrgyzstan, Askar Akayev, who became the normal Central Asian dictator. Everything could happen, but we will never have a chance to check it. So far, everything that Navalny was doing was not a fight for the dictatorship. We had possibilities, and that's why he has always been criticized by independent journalists. But now sitting here in your city in 2023, I've got a completely different question I'm asking myself. I remember winter of 2011-2012, when I was running TV Rain, and Navalny was obviously, he was considered to be a rising star, although it was clear that he was the biggest star of those protests on Bolotnaya. And for me, it was not a question. As if I graduated from Columbia School of Journalism, although I didn't have that privilege, but it was clear for me that we must be unbiased. Every other day, I would be preaching to my journalists not to think for any moment that they are political activists. They could not wear white ribbons. They could not participate in protest rallies. I told them they should have always remembered that newsmakers, you can feel sympathy or you can be inspired by one of them, but in the end of the day, Navalny and Putin are our newsmakers, and we should not take sides. But our mission was to cover the protests as much as we could, because we were the only media to pay attention. We were the only media to cover. But right now, thinking that obviously that was one of the chances that was lost. And right now I'm thinking if that choice, if those principles, if the fact that I chose to be the unbiased journalist, and my principle was that we were not the political party. Our mission was not to all the pro-Putin, but probably that was wrong. Probably if we joined Navalny, if I dropped that naivety, if I had decided to organize the unified anti-Putin front, and we turned our unbiased, or I used to say while being interviewed by foreign journalists, I used to say we're not oppositional TV channel, we're a normal TV channel. Probably the only normal in the country. But if we were oppositional TV channel, if we chose to drop our principles, and if we had become the good propaganda machine, probably we would have failed as well. But who knows? That's the only question I'm asking myself right now, because if there was a chance, probably it was there. And if I'm to blame for something, probably I'm to blame for the fact that I did not support Navalny. And if you remember, in the beginning of his political career, he had that controversial slogan, not even a slogan. It was the caption under his avatar in Life Journal: "The final battle between democracy and neutrality." So I chose to be neutral, because that's how journalists should do. Probably I must have chosen democracy, not neutrality. And just a quick response to Matt's idea about dilemma between Russian imperialism and corruption. I do think that for Russians internally, inside the country, it was, and it is, more effective, because I think that we see that Russians are being fed with all those imperial ideas and imperial propaganda, although they were not asking for that. The demand for imperial ambitions was not that high during the last years, because normally people beg for it, people need it when they are really poor, when they don't have anything to be proud of, when so it's a painkiller for the moments when you are really miserable. You cannot be proud of your family, of your job, of your dog, of anything. That's why you have to be proud of your country. But it was not the case for the last decades in Russia. People were not begging for the empire to come and to heal their wounds. They for the first time ever, probably in Russia's history, Russian population was getting better and better. People were, if not wealthy, but at least felt some decency in their living standards. That's why I think uncovering the fact that this war is not for the empire. Not Putin doesn't want more territories. He wants just to grab the power and to have it, to hold it, and to conserve that systemic corruption. That was important.
Yeah, I think that it's the dilemma of, are what tactics are appropriate for abnormal politics? And can we judge tactics used in abnormal politics the same way we do them during normal politics? And I teach a course called Autocracy and Democracy. And my undergraduates asked me yesterday, are you worried about American democracy? And I said, well, if this was normal politics, President Biden would be a shoo-in. The economy is doing very well, stock market's high, unemployment's down, crime is down, all the usual indicators, the structural things that we look at as political scientists would say. I said, but we are not in normal politics. So I am worried and I don't really know. So, and this would, I think, Navalny made this point, at a number of times where he said, look, we're doing things that we wouldn't normally do in a normal political system, but given the context in which we're operating, these are the kinds of compromises that we've had to make. Now, one could disagree with that and say, no, the process of fighting is as important as the actual outcome. So there is opposition figures debate about whether the ends kind of justify the means. But that's a very deep kind of question. Do you have any questions from the audience?
Can I just
Yes,
say
oh,
one?
yes,
Yeah,
please, yes.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, this is the challenge
Yes.
that Putin and other dictators have thrown to journalists, among others. And you can, teach journalism and objectivity or, fairness is what we've described more than objectivity, but they just keep throwing things at you that make you wonder, did I do the right thing,
Yeah,
Maybe we
I
have
didn't
to.
compromise, but I have doubts, maybe that
Right.
was in vain.
Right. But also just thinking about, this legacy question, and we've talked about, Navalny's legacies, the anti-corruption videos, and they're great, but I think they need to go beyond that. And I don't even know exactly what that means, but I think it's encouraging that Yulia Navalnaya has stepped up, said what she said, and has also said, we're going to tell you very soon why Navalny was killed, which suggests that they're not just going to be looking at yachts and airplanes and, the trappings of the oligarchy and corruption. So it's obviously a huge loss, but let's see what happens next with what they come up with. They are incredibly talented and committed people. And I'm saying that Yulia and the rest of the people who worked with the Anti-Corruption Foundation.
Great, thanks. If you're watching at home, feel free to include a question in the chat. But before we do that, I want to go to Chris Osborne.
Thanks very much. This is a great panel. I'm thinking about political stability in Russia and the prospect of another mass mobilization, because I think people who know more than I do have said that if Ukrainians can hang on for I don't know how long, but it will be required for the mass call-up in Russia. And I'm thinking about what Matt was saying about these people visiting Navalny's grave, and another one of the chants was Ukrainians are good people, and it just kind of amazed me, but I guess it shouldn't have. And the way Putin tries to, the version that he sells is that this is like Germany invading, this is like World War II, and this is like France invading, and we will be victorious. But the Germans haven't invaded. No one's chanting no one was chanting back then, the Germans are good people. It requires that enough of the population has to believe Putin's version of what's happening and his version of the cause of the war. And if there is a mass mobilization, then you've got resistance can be those folks who were chanting Ukrainians are good people. Maybe we call that intelligentsia opposition. But then you also are going to have to dive back into the stock that is in Buryatia, Udmurtia, Bashkortostan, Dagestan, disproportionately. And I wonder if that moment could be a moment of kind of reckoning for the regime.
Ben, do you want to jump in, or I'm glad to. I know the polling we've done and lots of other people have done. Mobilization is incredibly unpopular in Russia. So I'll turn to Ben though. abusing my role as moderator here, but
No, but it is the important point that, and it allows, I suppose, to raise a broader point, which is very often Putin's Russia is portrayed as a one-man dictatorship, and that phrase definitely captures really important parts of it, but including because of research by Tim in his book Weak Strongman, we know that that picture is a bit more complicated. And one of the ways in which we need to nuance it is by looking at how public opinion can sometimes shape the Kremlin's thinking. And the prime example of that relates to the language of a partial mobilization that we saw announced in September 2022. And it also means, I think, that it would be incredibly unlikely for a full mobilization to be called after the presidential election, even though there is past precedent for unpopular policy decisions being announced after presidential elections. So we look at the 2018 presidential election. After that, the authorities use it as an opportunity to pass the deeply unpopular pension reform, but they were able to weather that out. It led to some protest votes in the September regional elections, some systemic opposition governors winning, but then of course we know the fates of some of those individuals, including Sergei Fogel, who ended up in prison. So if this is an opportunity to place bets, then I would not put money on a full mobilization being called this year or any time in the near future. We're just likely to see stealth mobilization, so ways for the authorities to get the manpower, to get also the economic resources that they need. And regarding the latter, we've seen the expansion of the deprivatization program. So the General Prosecutor's Office going after or calling as illegal some of the privatization deals made in the 1990s. So in these stealth ways, these under the radar, not big flagship policy announcements that a full mobilization would be, that's, I think, the way that the authorities will approach this.
Alyona.
Thank you for the talk. If you'll allow me 2 questions. My first one would concern your what you make out of the Fobukas statement on that international actors were planning a swap between Navalny and the German, the man who's in Germany right now. Yes, sorry. And the other question is, you all described Navalny's evolution as a politician, and that he needed time to become what he was in the end. And I'm not being extremely hopeful that we will get a Navalny 2.0 in the near future, but what do you make of figures who might want to step into politics in a position right now, but did not have this time to evolve as actors in the Russian political sphere?
Definitely, I can speak about the swap. Yes, that I know quite a lot of facts that it was being prepared, and it was 5 for 5. And several countries were included, and from the beginning they were sure that Krasikov, the former spy who killed Chechen named Zelensky in Berlin, was the most precious asset for Putin, and Putin wanted. Putin was sure that he can exchange him for Ivan Gershkovich, because in his mindset, Joe Biden can just call Scholz and order him to give Krasikov, and that was not the way how it would work. And for Germans, it was much more complicated, because but Navalny was probably the only figure who was well known for the German audience, and Germany could think of saving Navalny, because once he was treated in Charité clinic. But there is one more important issue. I think that Putin was not aware of all those negotiations. These were the back channels. Some people from the intelligence, from FSB, and they did not dare report to put it that Navalny is the part of that skin. And if we go back to year 2021, when Navalny was jailed, he was reported that the problem is solved. That he was not going to hear anything about Navalny because that politician does not exist anymore. And that was his mindset, and that was actually the message all the propagandists kept on repeating, including Peskov, including Margaret Simonyan. They were saying that there is everyone forgot him. He does not exist. There is no politician named Alexey Navalny, because that was something Putin strongly believed in. And he doesn't use iPhone, he doesn't check Instagram or Twitter, so he could not know what was really happening, how really Navalny was influential, and how really he was the key leader of the Russian opposition. And actually, so he heard probably for the first time since Navalny's imprisonment about Navalny a month ago when Roman Abramovich came to him as a mediator for that huge exchange 545, and that was slightly before Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson, and the moment when he very obviously angrily started discussing the possible exchange Vadim Prasikov for Ivan Gershkovich was the fact that he was insisting on that skin. He never wanted Navalny to be exchanged. He never was ready to set him free, and actually he was reminded of the fact that his enemy is still alive, and actually that was the moment. Ironically, that was the moment when he obviously decided to kill him.
So it wasn't going to happen.
That was probably there was no plan to kill him in February 2023.
No, but I mean, there was the swap was not going to happen. Probably
it was going to happen, but Putin didn't know about that, and he wanted the swap without Navalny. And that's why he wanted to reset the process, and he wants Krasikov back. He's ready to give Gershkovich or Paul Whelan. Obviously, he's not ready to do that right now because he doesn't want the president for Biden administration. He wants. You probably remember the moment when hostages from the Tehran embassy were sent to Washington during the inauguration day of Ronald Reagan. So that's the plan. The inauguration day of Donald Trump, and
rather telling that Putin would equate Krasikov and Gershkovich with very different occupations, shall we say. Great. Question
So
here.
you're saying that had there not been the opportunity for a prisoner exchange, Navalny would be alive?
It's a bit too strong. I think that there was a possibility that he might have been forgotten for a longer period of time. Till some other moment.
So there'd be another catalyst that would push Putin.
Yeah.
So I have a question, because I'm sitting here thinking the whole time. In terms of world history, I cannot remember any other human being like an Alexey Navalny, who spoke as he spoke, came back from Germany after he was poisoned, and was really led by his faith in democracy and what it could do for his country. I mean, to me, he's always been somebody who's a superhero. I don't mean superhero, I mean, terrific human being. Can you think of anybody like him ever?
I used to compare him to Martin Luther King, So yeah, I think if we dig in, it should be something it's easier to think of him if we're start thinking about the first Christian martyrs, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not about democracy, but it's about the just world and the true faith. So for me, when I was speaking about the cult, I didn't mean to offend him. I just think that he was, and his model was he had to show to his supporters that he is in the first row. He is fighting. He starts the fight. He's leading the army. He is the moral example. So he's ready to die for it. It was obligatory for that kind of role model. So yes, he was ready to go to into the fire.
Yeah. The other example would be Nelson Mandela, but ending up like Stephen Biko. That's the horrible one. Iveta,
My name is Iveta Sergeyeva. I run a panel survey of Russian migrants, people who are now in exile. We have more than 10,000 participants. And I know that many of these people that Alexey Navalny was popular among many of those people, we know it because 50% of these people actually use smart voting in their voting strategies. Then back to Russia. And so these people are possibly people who follow the news about him and they're all political active. At the same time, these people are deeply fearful of Russian repression. We know that 80% of them are now currently afraid of being repressed by Russian government. And many of them feel very precarious in the countries that they are currently in. So my question is, how do you think for Yulia Navalny, would it be an effective political step now to try to advocate for rights of these people who are actually auditory of her husband? And I know that there are many speculations on that, but what is your take on this? Thank you.
I don't know. We have just read the news of Yulia Navalny and Alena Zelensky. Did not attend the State of Union, and everyone understands that any kind of advocacy of Russian refugees, of Russian immigrants, is politically incorrect, because you cannot say that aloud while there are a lot of Ukrainian refugees and Ukrainian immigrants, and Ukraine is fighting. So that's the key issue. You cannot. So it's amazing that I remember I was talking to Neil McFarquhar, correspondent of the New York Times, and about Yulia Navalny, and I told him that I wish, I hope she can become like Svetlana Tikhanovskaya for Russians. And the next day, I was talking to my German editor from Spiegel, and he asked me, "And please, can you explain to our audience how she can, how she should act not to become Svetlana Tikhanovskaya?" Because for me, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was a good example. Like any kind of unifying figure is good example. For German editor, that was the worst example, because obviously, yeah, she's not an effective politician. I think for us, having Svetlana Tikhanovskaya would be an achievement.
Well, on that same note, is there a role, do you think, for other members of the family like Dozhd Navalny, for his mom, Alexei's mother, who showed such incredible poise and bravery during the last few weeks, or other members of his team, or you know, like Kira or Maria did some beautiful videos as well.
You know, we're here on record, so you know, I know all of them. I personally don't know Dasha. I know Maria Vershik very well. Know you. I think Yulia has the biggest potential because she is loved by everyone, and she's got no enemies so far. Hopefully, she won't get one. I think probably Dasha is in the beginning of her career. No one knows her. She has never been heard or seen for the Russian audience. She was acting like she received the Sakharov Prize 2 years ago, but she is not known. No one knows her at all. Everyone knows Maria Pevchik, and Maria, for many people, she's a bit too radical. There are a lot of comparisons of her to, some kind of Bolshevik revolutionary with a gun who is willing to kill the enemies of the revolution. So she's like that Komsomol fighter. That's not my comparison. I've read it in so she's impressive. She's popular. She's a bit too she's like the deputy leader of the cult. But she's important. She's an important figure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a broader question of whether people make the moments or whether the moments make the people. And, depending on political context, there could be other people that rise up that we don't know who, seize the moment and, looking down the road, we often are surprised when autocrats fall or are fading about who emerges as the key opposition figure. Sometimes it's moderates, people who haven't been tainted by their association with the regime. Sometimes it's people who are outsiders. It's not very often that it's people from outside coming back. That's a much more difficult strategy to traverse. So it's very difficult for us right now to pick who that person is going to be, because if we can see it, so can Vladimir Vladimirovich, right? And he has means to make sure that person does not rise to the top. So
yeah, but actually two months ago we were seriously discussing the political chances of Boris Nadezhdin.
Yeah.
Who remembers Boris Nadezhdin right now? But who knew him 3 months ago? But he had his moment.
Yeah, it really depends on the context. And at the moment when Putin looks like he's slipping, there's a lot of people who would like to run Russia. It's a good job, it's hard to predict that now, but I'm pretty confident that there will be no shortage of people looking for that job.
And there's no guarantee that whoever that next person or group is any better than Putin, as we've seen in Egypt and other places in the Middle East, sadly.
We might be willing to take our chances at this point. Anyway.
I'm interested to hear more of the panel's thoughts on Navalny's quite complicated attitude and relationship to Ukraine. As for people it's no surprise I'm the one asking that question. On the one hand, he was an outspoken opponent of the war. On the other hand, some of the things he said and his reluctance to return Crimea has made him not a very popular figure amongst Ukrainians, right? And I can see Navalnaya facing the same challenges. She is speaking out against the war, but she's not saying the word Ukraine in her speeches. And to a certain extent, I understand that for a Russian opposition figure, the most important thing is to appeal to the Russian public and not the Ukrainian public. So how do you navigate this, and somebody who says that you return Ukrainian territory will make you popular with Ukrainians in the West, but potentially not with the majority of Russians? I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Great, great. I've been waiting for this, so thanks. Ben, do you want to take the first crack at this? And I'm sure we all kind of have some thoughts on this, so.
Yeah, it's a great question, Emma, and it's really the core question that I think people need to address now. I would say that I'm most interested to hear what Mikhail has to say in response to it, but it relates to the broader problem that has happened since the crackdown against FBK following Navalny's return to the country, that with their shift from FBK to the Anti-Corruption Foundation, ACF, with their website that I think that the default language is in English, and with their list of 6,000 individuals who they want to be sanctioned, there is a clear tension there. Is their primary audience people in the West, who might be responsive to one set of talking points, or is their audience Russians in Russia who might look skeptically towards an initiative that is calling for the sanctioning of 6,000 Russian officials, some of which are in sort of the middle tier, aren't the high-level politicians that we're used to seeing and criticizing. Emma, I don't have an answer, and I certainly don't have advice to Yulia Navalnaya about whether she should start mentioning Ukraine more often, and you've put it very eloquently why she is trapped in that regard. I haven't been able to speak to her, which is one of the reasons, I suppose, why I'm keen to hear what Mikhail has to say about it, which is a bit of a cop-out, but I'll hand the time to him. We're running out of time.
Yeah. Well, you can make more time, don't worry. And Mikhail, do you want to go and then hand?
It's a complicated question for me. As I don't know if I'm the right person to answer, because having my Russian passport in my pocket doesn't give me the opportunity to speak neutrally. Sometimes I think that we that a lot of accusations, as I've said that before. I just yesterday I was watching my last recorded not one of the last recorded interviews with Navalny for TV rating back in 2015, and he was super pro-Ukrainian. It was after the annexation of Crimea. He for half an hour he was speaking that the beginning of the war against Ukraine was the worst mistake of Putin's regime, and he was very he spoke a lot about that, and so that interview I watched yesterday aged well, and I think that sometimes I've got a feeling that a criticism and distrust against all Russians is hurtful, but I understand those feelings. I understand why Ukrainians and what Ukrainians mean when they say that there are no good Russians. It's a very emotional position. It doesn't give me the opportunity to respond. I thought in the beginning, during the Munich conference, that where Yulia Navalny was and Volodymyr Zelensky was there as well, I thought that it was a very good opportunity if he used the word Navalny while commenting on his death. That was a very good chance of some kind of that was the only moment when Russians needed moral support. And I think if that had been done, that definitely that would be a very good sign. I understand that for Ukrainians it's super hard, and we have seen the reaction of the social media in Ukraine. Russians have lost the sandwich. That was the very popular joke when the party was capped, and Russians are hiding the sandwich. That was the jokes on the day of the funeral. I think we are unfortunately cannot find that public language of public reconciliation. I hope that Yulia will find because it's very I think she takes it much more personal. I think for Alexey it was easier, and he could easily speak about Ukraine and denounce the war and claim that borders of 1991 are the only legitimate borders of Russia and Ukraine. I think there should be a political decision, and I don't know if Yulia is ready for that kind of political rhetorics.
Yeah, I
Tim,
can't.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, may I make a quick comment on this?
Oh, yeah, Matt, that's right. Great, thanks. Yes.
No, not at all. So I want to I want to go back to I want to distinguish between what are the politics of this and what are the analytics of this. And so if you go back to what Alexey Navalny said on the day of Putin's expanded military invasion into Ukraine, and you highlight that he was defining as a key cause of this war Putin's desire to divert attention from corruption, theft, and failed modernization at home, then the question becomes how, of course, the causes of this war are very complex. And there are many narratives out there about what has caused this war. But if Alexey was indeed correct that a single and very important driver was diversion of domestic public opinion from the problems of corruption at home, then analytically it becomes necessary to stay focused on that corruption in Russia as not only a cause of war, but somehow as a necessary ingredient in any potential solution or termination of the war. So I appreciate that there are lots of politics around what you can say exactly, but I think the Navalny, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, Yulia herself are in a good position to seek to penetrate the Russian information space with these analytics around what actually caused this war in the first place. And so I think it's an interesting opportunity in a way, and it's something in the West that we should also be looking at, is what could be done more proactively. I know that the Russian information space is very complicated, and I don't pretend to be an expert on how to do this technically. But from a strategic point of view, there's a moment here to highlight Putin's personal corruption and the systemic corruption of the 100 or so people around him who made the decision to go to war.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. That was great.
yeah, I don't have any great insights here, but I just, as an observer and a reader and a watcher, I just find it so discouraging that there isn't some kind of circle of unity between Ukrainians and the many Russians who are against this war. And I think, both of those groups have to be more flexible and recognize the situation that each of them are in. I mainly have heard things said about, Russian media, Russian independent media, and there needs to be a recognition of what they were up against, why they have left, how they're trying to operate, and why they are, what is motivating them, and being against the war is a big part of that. But there's, I don't know, I don't see any movement that kind of brings people together, and I think that's a real shame.
Yeah. Alexander, do you want to weigh in on this? You might have some thoughts.
Exactly on that point.
Say who you are and
Alexey Navalny, media. I'm this particular when we're talking about anti-corruption being the mode of identifying the symptoms of the regime and something that might cause the war, which I don't really think that we have to stop here, because anti-corruption was indeed a symptom, and what was another part of Navalny's message that was particularly effective was his ability to inspire people, his ability to provide some kind of a vision of the future, which is kind of creative at the same time. There was some kind of a singular vision, and he was, even while he was in prison, he was perhaps the most outspoken figure in the Russian political space who was trying to identify ways towards that future, but they shaped that future to look like that might be a little more primitive or whatever what he was proposing in the Russian Post article. But still, he was trying to inspire people to see some kind of opportunity. The word hope had been mentioned so many times. particularly during his funeral procession. So I believe that what the movement or whatever the opposition movement is lacking right now, specifically, is any way of inspiring people towards seeing some kind of a new possibilities in solidarity, of building shared future, of understanding realistically what and why we are Russians, what exactly makes us Russians, and what exactly we want to be. So I guess this is an important point to make, not just this this specific idea of anti-corruption, but also the idea of not being against something, but being pro something. Yeah, but that's just a remarkable moral.
No, thanks. It's Emma, do you have any thoughts on this, or to put you on the spot? I'm sorry, you don't have to respond, but
It's interesting, and I really appreciate the sensitivity and the awareness with which you answered my question, Mikhail, because I think this is. I'm also aware that this is on record, because I think there's a trajectory whereby the most beneficial thing for both Ukrainians and Russians in the long term is to see a more democratic regime in Russia, right? But in the shorter term, the most immediate way to achieve that might not be for a pro-democracy figure, a more democratic figure, opposition figure in Russia to come out hard and say, we're going to give Ukraine all of its territories back right now. Do you see what I mean? I think I don't agree with that perspective, but I think there's a difference between shorter term tactics and longer term strategy. And I think there's some very difficult conversations to be had. So I appreciate people's willingness to engage in those difficult conversations, because it's not easy.
you know, this is, threading a needle of trying to appeal to a variety of different audiences that have very different preferences. And, if Navalny's relationship with the West has always been very interesting, because I think he saw the liberals of the 1990s as far too closely associated with the West. And I think he consciously took steps to ensure that that label did not stick to him. And I think it was also true to his upbringing. He didn't study in the West. He wasn't, familiar with lots of foreigners the way that, lots of the liberals of the 1990s were. So he cut a very different figure, and a lot of those more Western-oriented liberals were very suspicious of Navalny for not sharing their same kind of Western liberal views. Eventually, Navalny comes to that, but he comes to it from a very different place, I think, intellectually and personally, than the Gaidars and a lot of other Russian liberals from an earlier period. So I think this has been a really interesting discussion, and we could go on for a long period of time, and I hope we will. I mean, I think it would be important to pay respects to the legacy of Alexey Navalny, to keep this conversation going in a variety of different fora. One event that we're hoping to have is a showing of the Navalny documentary in association with the School of the Arts. So that's something to look forward to. But maybe I was wrong. I was dreading having to host this panel, but I know that I've learned a lot, and I think it's been a really rich discussion. And I want to thank all of our panelists for engaging in what are really complicated and difficult topics to discuss. So please join me in giving our panelists a big round of applause. And Eileen, it's okay if we went over, right?
Too late anyway.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
I know when I was working on